users. In the case of Somalia, let me give you a little bit of context to understand some of the information I'm going to share. Somalia is one of the world's most severe cases of state failure. We can call it a fragile state if it makes you feel better, but the fact is it's a failed state. The government, and I say this, the president is an old friend of mine. We even co-authored a chapter together. I wish him well, but the reality is after 3 years of governing, his government still can't even control most of the neighborhoods of the capital, Mogadishu, much less anything in the countryside, provides very few resources. It is recognized internationally, so it has juridical sovereignty without earning the empirical sovereignty that we've come to expect of member states of the United Nations. This has gone on for 25 years, so this is one of the longest running instances of state failure or state collapse. This has huge implications. Somalia has a youth bulge. 74% of its population is under the age of 30. You do the math. It's been a collapsed state for 25 years. That means 75% or more of the population has no living memory of what a state is even supposed to do. That's a whole new level of state building than you might have normally expected. This is going to be a huge, huge project there. The state is protected currently by 22,000 African Union peacekeeping forces called AMISOM. Were it not for AMISOM's presence, this state would probably be on boats out to sea. It would be driven out by armed groups, most notably Shabab, that we'll talk about in a few minutes. The security sector of the government is the largest part of the government. It includes 6 brigades. These brigades have received extensive training, salary support, and weapons and ammunition from the outside world, including us. But the brigades are all clan paramilitaries. They are not integrated. Different brigades are linked to particular clans. They answer to the commander who is looking after clan interests. There's no chain of command up to civilian authorities. So these are essentially armed units doing what's best for their particular community. And in some cases, that means going into parts of southern Somalia and, along with AMISOM, ousting al-Shabaab from these areas. So we now have liberated areas or recovered zones in southern Somalia in places like the lower Shabelle here, and then claiming it as theirs, with the local community saying, thank you so much for liberating us from al-Shabaab, but now you've just replaced one form of occupation with another. These armed brigades are very predatory and sometimes ruthless with regard to the local population. And one of the great frustrations for many of us is that our taxpayer dollars are going to support these armed units that are driving the locals back into the hands of guess who? Al-Shabaab, the group that we're fighting in southern Somalia. So great frustration in terms of getting basic command and control over these clan paramilitaries, and then even bigger problems just controlling them at the unit level because they are generally unpaid. Now, you might ask, wait a minute, you just said we were paying for them. And it's true. The international community is chipping in. Different countries are paying for different brigades and units. The money isn't always getting there. It's being intercepted by high-level officials, and so soldiers are going 4 or 5 months without pay. What do you expect them to do? They're either going to loot in order to make a living, and that alienates the local population, or they are going to defect either to no one or to Shabab. Many of them have gone back and forth from Shabab to the military repeatedly, just looking for whoever will pay them a salary. In addition to the army, we also have police. Almost all the police in Mogadishu are from one clan, the president's clan. They do not serve as a source of law and order. Instead, if you take a case to them, they typically demand a bribe. They are avoided. So what we've got is a pretty large security sector, but one that is not providing security. In fact, one that is the main source of insecurity for large sections of the population. The result, security is poor in southern Somalia. It's not Mad Max anarchy. This isn't a war of all against all. There are systems in place for people to provide varying levels of security and order for themselves, but those systems involve, for the most part, armed non-state actors. The first and biggest armed non-state actor in southern Somalia today remains al-Shabaab. This is a jihadist group. I won't go into the details. It'll take forever. But this violent extremist group has been on its heels geographically for the past 5 years. It's lost control of the neighborhoods it controlled in Mogadishu. It's lost control of all of the main towns and cities in southern Somalia, Baidoa, Brava, Kismayo. It has now been pushed into the countryside. But if you look at the green area here that it controls, it still controls a lot of the countryside in southern Somalia. What it does today is it does not provide security for people. This is not an armed security provider in the way that it used to when it controlled cities. Today, what it does in the cities is it actually threatens people. It extorts money. It's got a network called the Amniyat, which is intact. Even though the group left the neighborhoods in terms of fighting forces, they retained this network. This network knows every Somali, who they work for, how much they make, and they shake them down for taxes every month. If you don't pay the taxes, you run the risk of being targeted, and that includes some of the biggest businesses. One of the big hotels that was hit recently, the rumor is that's because they had their own security and was refusing to pay taxes to Shabab, and so they go after that particular hotel. I'm getting a little leery of these because every hotel that I stayed at in Mogadishu keeps getting blown up, so I'm thinking about specializing in another country. The key here, though, is this is a group that's no longer providing, it's actually creating insecurity in order to profit from it. You threaten, and then you extort. That's an important theme, because Shabab is not the only group in southern Somalia that has figured this formula out. Shabab also engages in acts of terrorism. They typically are focusing on high-value targets, hard targets, spectacular, complex terrorist attacks that result in lots of casualties and that are designed to demoralize the government, demoralize its supporters, intimidate people from supporting it. Shabab has two other important features. One is penetration. Its Amniyat network isn't just in the neighborhoods, it's right into the government. It's right into the Amisom translators. It's into some of the aid agencies. They've got very good intelligence on us. They know a lot more about us than we know about them. And then the other key feature of this group is collusion. This is not what most Westerners think of when we look at this fight of the Amisom and the federal government versus Shabab. In fact, there's an enormous amount of collaboration and collusion going on between different groups. Clans will move their allegiance from one side to the other. Individuals will go back and forth frequently, sometimes at high levels. The government will see Shabab as less threatening than a local rival and will tactically collude with them. As a result, a lot of the weapons and ammunition and trained individuals that we set up in the government end up in Shabab's hands. The most notorious case of this is in Kismayo, which was liberated by the Kenyan forces as now part of the African Union peacekeeping forces, along with a Somali group called the Ras Kamboni militia. To give you an example of how pragmatic all these relationships are, the Ras Kamboni militia was, in 2006 and 2007, a scary jihadi movement. Their leader was on our most wanted list. They were allies with al-Shabaab. Then they got in a fight over the Kismayo seaport revenues with al-Shabaab. They fought al-Shabaab over the money and lost. Ras Kamboni militia, which is clan-based, a clan in this area called the Ogaden, said, this is ours. Why are you taking our seaport revenue? You've got other seaports. In a fit, they switched sides and now are close allies with Ethiopia, Kenya, and the United States and have nice shiny weapons from us and took the seaport from Kismayo. What does that tell you? It tells you, again, an extraordinary amount of pragmatism here in terms of who is siding with what. But one of the things we were most hopeful about in Kismayo is that liberating Kismayo from al-Shabaab meant that al-Shabaab lost its biggest source of finances, charcoal exports. $40 to $70 million a year, we estimate, was being made by charcoal exports out of that port. Now they're going to dry out. Now they're in real trouble, right? Now, $40 to $70 million is actually a lot of cash. You don't just walk away from that. So it turns out that the Kenyan military and Ras Kamboni militia figured out this was good business. They controlled the seaport. Al-Shabaab controls the hinterland where the charcoal is, so they collude. So they're working this out together. The charcoal exports are going out as much as before, and these two sides that are supposed to be fighting each other are actually have been in business together. The Kenya government, of course, denies this, and I will too if this is taped and you give it to them. So next, what other non-state actors do we have out there besides the government and Shabab? Well, we've got a whole bunch. I'll give you a quick map. No, I didn't put that map on there. We have in Mogadishu, which I'll mostly focus on now rather than the country. First and foremost, we have district commissioners. Now, that sounds pretty innocuous, right? A district commissioner. What are they, a paper pusher, right? No. In fact, Mogadishu is divided into 16 districts. Each district commissioner controls a fiefdom. Most of these neighborhoods, not all, some are multi-ethnic, but most are clan-based. Even the multi-ethnic ones are dominated by one clan. The district commissioner is the head of that clan's paramilitary. Even though he has no right to do so, he controls a clan paramilitary that is essentially a protection racket in his fiefdom. Can the police go in there? No. Well, they can try. They'll get shot at. Can the military go in there? Only with permission. You better let them know before you come into their checkpoints. Who are these clan paramilitary? Well, they're all people in the army and the police who are double dipping. So they're getting a salary sometimes from the military or the police, but then they're working for the district commissioner. These are the most powerful individuals in terms of armed actors in Mogadishu. The government has tried to marginalize them. The mayor has tried to fire them, sometimes successfully, but then they'll be replaced by a nephew who ends up just being, you know, the token while the real warlord is still in power. This protection that they provide in these districts is real. Some of these districts are quite safe. In fact, the reason that some of them are multi-ethnic is because they do provide good protection. And those places are safer to live. Real estate values go way up as a result, but the protection is uneven. If you're from the clan of that warlord, you are the district commissioner, you've got strong protection. Otherwise, you're renting. You're buying protection from them, but it's not as strong. And in still other cases, if you are an internally displaced person, and 1 in 4 Somalis living in Mogadishu today, about 300,000 to 400,000 of them are internally displaced from the famine and war. You have no protection at all. You are essentially being preyed on by these militia, these paramilitary. They've set up camps to attract and divert humanitarian aid. The camp managers are actually called black cats in Somalia for their role in diverting the aid, and there's very little that they can do about that. Next, there are neighborhood watch groups. People have not been passive victims in the face of state collapse. They've gotten together and established informal watch groups with varying degrees of effectiveness, but all extra-constitutional, all illiberal. There are business militia. The larger businesses in Mogadishu, which are pretty robust, have hundreds of armed men protecting their fixed assets, protecting their vehicles. These are full-time security forces. They are dedicated. They are almost always from the clan, unless it's transportation. And then there's this fascinating multi-clan. You have to pick members from different clans in order to navigate through whichever roads that you want to get to. These tend to be the most reliable sources of protection, but just for the business, except for one little caveat. The areas that are the most secure in Mogadishu, which have tended to be in this area right here. This is the airport compound that AMISOM and the UN occupy. This is the famous K4, kilometer 4 intersection. This is where some of the biggest businesses are, and then up into Bakara, the famous Bakara market. These areas have business militia that provides security not just for the hotel or the Coca-Cola bottling factory or whatever it is that they're protecting, but they tend to cooperate with one another. They have radios, they share information, they share intelligence, there's something suspicious, so they talk to one another. Well, what happens is they create an umbrella of security in that whole neighborhood. So there are free riders who are crowding into those neighborhoods who don't pay a cent for security, but who are benefiting from this collection of business militia that are providing security for the whole neighborhood. Again, you can imagine how expensive real estate is in those areas. There's huge difference in the cost of real estate in one part of Mogadishu to another, and it's all driven by security. Then there are the private security companies. They don't run a hotel or Coca-Cola bottling factory or a remittance company. They are there just to sell security and protection. There are dozens of them. Some are very small. Some are quite large, well-established, have their own website.